we need to lock in what Apple can do. So this part shouldn't be fluid. So what day, how many per 100? And so I said that even if they can't do that, let's say that they can't use 30 vehicles, they can use 15.
Oh, you're talking about
Yeah, because it's over 100 delegates, 100 chamber.
NACO. NACO one?
No, the NICO one is we
Oh,
figured
the chamber has over 100 delegates?
right.
Oh,
It's a lot. So I said, well, if they can't, if you're asking for this amount on this day, I at least we can take that half the basketball because that's what you can't leave through. So if they can only do 15, then you're going to say the chamber. I know. So did I. Yesterday when I found out,
oh, okay. I missed that.
yeah. So that's why I said, put in writing what you want. We're going to get it tomorrow.
Okay.
Then what you want, we'll say to after, okay, don't worry, we know this is a lot. Just tell us what you can.
Okay.
And then we'll go back and
It was awesome. I would never, wouldn't change the moment.
Good morning, and we'll call to order the meeting of the Regional Transportation Commission Board of Directors. Ms. Quigley.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman, members of the commission, your first item is to conduct your first citizens participation period.
First time set aside for public comment. Those wishing to speak on a posted agenda item, now is your opportunity. Seeing and hearing no one, we'll close this portion of public comment.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Second item is to approve the agenda. Your agenda is in order and ready for your approval.
Motion on the floor. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carries.
Third item is to receive the Chief Executive Officer's Report, formerly known as the General Manager's Report. Our first item in today's CEO report is a Superstar of the Quarter. Our first RTC Superstar of the Quarter is in our Vehicle Maintenance Department. This individual discovered an electrical defect in our paratransit fleet that was originally overlooked by our vendor. This defect would have resulted in vehicle shutdowns. He explored ideas with both vendors and arrived at a solution to address the problem and avoid disruptions in service to our paratransit customers. Please help me recognize our first Superstar of the Quarter, Mr. Randy Brown. No, you got to come all the way around for pictures. Randy is one of the most humble people you will meet.
Get a little tighter.
Randy, you get to.
Wow,
It gets better. You get to talk too.
You don't understand with that. Well, very unexpected. I was actually thought I was coming down here for somebody else to receive an award. So, good job, Rudy and Dave. But yeah, this was a team effort. This was about me just finding it. You know, I work with the contractors very well. Working with Transdev and Dave Bauer is how we discovered this. So, thanks to them as well. And you know, 28 years in transit. You know, what a blessing in RTC, give me the tools that they do to better myself and come in every day, and no matter how hard it is, great day. Thank you.
Thanks, Randy. All right, we have another Superstar of the Quarter. This person is from the Finance Department. Thanks to her attention to detail, this individual was able to recoup more than $50,000 for the RTC during a thorough review of invoices. She encountered 2 instances where we were incorrectly charged by other agencies. Please help me recognize Repelito Ramos, also known as Ping. Ping, are you here?
Oh, good morning. Thank you. Sorry, I wasn't expecting this. I was supposed to attend a training. So I blocked my calendar for after 12 o'clock, so you might be hearing me until 12. But thank you so much. It's great, to be recognized. And of course, I want to wish, everyone continued support for me and for the whole team. But I want to thank everyone because I know the success of the group was, I mean, my success was also the success of the group. And I've been with transportation for almost, 15 years now, being in the other side of the of the fence. I used to be with the contractors, so now that I've been almost 5 years with the RTC, so it's really nice, to be in a good company and to be with good people. And thank you, everyone. Yeah.
Next, we would like to recognize a mechanic from our contractor, MB Transportation, Mr. Jesse Steele. Do we have Jesse with us? Come on down, Jesse. Mr. Steele is credited for the complex electrical design of 2 unique additions to the RTC. He coordinated the electrical and computer re-engineering of the 2 buses at the Mobility Training Center so they simulate working vehicles. Additionally, he helped transform and customize our onboard public engagement bus, which is equipped with a TV, generators, and electrical outlets to power computers for presentations, all with the vehicle's existing wiring. So he's very resourceful. We're very appreciative of your knowledge and experience, Mr. Steele. Thank you for your outstanding work.
Well, I'm not much public speaker, so I'll make it brief. Needless to say, this was kind of a surprise, and I'm very thankful for it and appreciative. The transition from the automotive background to mass transit had its moments, and I'd like to thank the coworkers that I worked with that had the knowledge and expertise to help me on my way. And I'm looking forward to the challenges from the new advanced technology being put into these units. And once again, thank you.
And we have one more recognition. Our last recognition is our quarterly RTC contractor recognition. The RTC would like to recognize Sandy Sanders, a dispatcher with our paratransit contractor Transdev. During her time with Transdev, Ms. Sanders has displayed outstanding customer service and compassion for both our passengers and operators. In February, she received a call from a driver informing her that a passenger was undergoing a medical episode. Ms. Sanders immediately sprang into action and called for medical assistance, as well as the passenger's emergency contact. She demonstrated grace under pressure while maintaining constant communication with all parties. Ms. Sanders faced a similar situation last month, and she once again handled it with precision and professionalism. So thank you for your exceptional customer service. And again, let's recognize and applaud Sandy Sanders.
I just want to thank everyone for recognizing me, my team at Transdev, Sandy Neely, Dave Bauer, RTC. You guys have been a great support to me, and thank you.
Yay. And Sandy, you look beautiful. All right, last week we, along with local leaders and community partners, celebrated National Infrastructure Week to raise awareness about the foundational role infrastructure plays in building and ensuring the economic vibrancy of our community. More than 500 people from the community and 75 companies joined us in this celebration. So we're going to share a short video recap of the week's events.
Fantastic day today that we're highlighting at a national level what we're doing here in the Western United States.
A lot of amazing investment in infrastructure in Nevada, particularly here in Southern Nevada. And what is really exciting is the blend of infrastructure investment and innovation and technology that is helping get the most out of that investment.
Well, transportation is about, it's a means to an end. And that end is economic competitiveness, it's quality of life, it's access to opportunity.
We're facing a significant turnover in our workforce, and that's great because it creates lots of opportunity. At the same time, it's a little scary, right? Like I have all these people who have all this depth of knowledge, so we have to be creative about how we use what we have to move people more efficiently and effectively.
There's a lot of opportunities in the construction and infrastructure development arena. So we need to get the word out to the community and to certainly a lot of the students that are out there so that they can prepare for these great opportunities.
I was actually told about this by a friend. They just told me to come check it out, and kind of glad I did now because I actually got a job with paratransit.
So we're at the Suncoast Hotel. Very exciting. We're talking clean energy. We're talking transportation. This is a partnership that we have with the RTC and the Latin Chamber of Commerce, and each year it gets bigger and bigger. I can't believe the energy already in the room. So a little later today, we're going to go from Expo, which is open to the public now, to a luncheon, and we're going to have Senator Jackie Rosen. We are going to have a panel with experts, and really what it's going to be is it's going to be an education in clean energy, in transportation, and all things that are good for our community.
Today's discussion is really going to be focused on renewable energy and how it's coming in these different sectors. And talking about, okay, here's where we are today, where do we want to be in the future, and how can we get there?
Lots of community involvement, much appreciated for a week that invests our attention in infrastructure, something that we do need to be continuing to talk about. Although I will let you know, we, unlike so many other metropolitan areas across the United States, are so lucky to have our FRI resources for the projects that we've got. I'm on conference calls regularly with my peers across the United States, and it's so, you can't help but smile and feel like slightly like ha 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 as they're talking about how difficult it is just to continue to maintain the roads that they've got. So, yes. That concludes your general manager's or chief executive officer's report. And now we're going to move on to item number 4, which is to receive the Nevada Department of Transportation Director's Report from Director Swallow. And I have to say, you are doing if you don't know what's going on with NDOT, to some extent, that means you're not checking your Twitter or your LinkedIn, because Christina is really great about being out on social media and keeping us apprised as to what she's doing, what her teams are doing. So, well done.
Thank you. And thank you for having me. I'm just going to note it's almost as cold here as it is in Reno right now. So I was hoping to warm up a little bit down here. But I'm excited to be here to present our May monthly report. And I'm going to start with Project Neon. You're not going to have to hear about Project Neon for a lot longer, but just a little bit more. And so last week we announced that we were at 96% completion. All of the roads are open, but we're still doing a little bit of work. So what's left? We have some paving that we still have to do. If you've driven the roads, you've seen the final striping isn't down yet. There's some surface conditions along the main parts of I-15. And so part of that paving is going to result in some closures on I-15. From June 7th through June 10th, in the overnight hours, we will be doing southbound closures of I-15 to do the final crumb rubber paving layer. We have to do that. We're doing it overnight, so we impact traffic less, but we have to do it while the temperatures are warm enough to do so. And so it better warm up quick, because I need 80 degrees and higher overnight by June 7th. And then the following weekend, we'll be doing the northbound lanes of I-15 overnight hours from 10 p.m. to 5 a.m. Again, just doing the final paving layer on I-15. We're also doing some restriping and paving on the surface streets. And if you've been through the corridor at all, you've seen that the final aesthetics are coming in. I saw the bridges are getting painted. I'm really looking forward to the City of Las Vegas's art pieces at Grand Central and Charleston. I'm really looking forward to seeing those. So we're getting close. It's almost done. And HOV lanes, in case you haven't heard, they're open. They're open. And from what I can tell, yes, but you may still get pulled over. The grace period, NHP is allowing, there's a 30-day grace period, and just to clarify on that, that doesn't mean you won't get pulled over, you just won't get the ticket. So, and personally, I would rather just not get pulled over, because the time delay sometimes is a little bit worse than even the ticket. So, so don't use them unless you have 2 people or more in your car. And so yes, the HOV lanes are open. We're really excited to see the full extent of the system. So previously, we just had a 12-mile system. It was only on 95, but now we're actually serving the resort corridor. It's 22 miles long. It's going to take time for people to increase their adoption of the lanes, but we fully anticipate they will, and we're looking forward to that. And I did just want to thank the RTC for partnering with us in this, in their efforts with a club ride and doing the carpool match. So if you're interested in carpooling, you can sign up for Club Ride, and they'll find you a commuter match, which I think is awesome. It's not a forced partnership, but it's a suggestion. These people live near you, they commute at the same times. They might be a good option if you want to use the carpool lane. So thank you to the RTC. All right, Boulder Highway. I'm excited to see the project is on the agenda for this meeting, but in the meantime, we all knew that we couldn't wait. We had to do some things up front and quickly. And so earlier this month, we finished up our pedestrian safety improvements on 8 most critical sites along the corridor. I know you can't, well, you guys can, but those in the audience, you probably can't see all of the street names, but they extend all the way from Oakey to south of College. That's the extent of the locations that we did do some improvements. Each intersection's needs and challenges are different, and so every intersection is slightly different in terms of what we did. We did some overhead flashing beacons, painted crosswalks, and some Danish offset median islands. So we're excited to announce that those have been completed, and we're looking forward to working on the continuation of the project moving forward. I-15 Tropicana, a lot of people have been asking me what's next after Neon. So I-15 Tropicana is one of our next projects that we're working on, and we've been talking a lot about. So we know, and we've known for a while, that this is going to be a critical section of road from Tropicana up to Flamingo. And so what we're doing is we're looking at how do we expand that bridge, how do we even improve operations on Tropicana. So we're in the environmental assessment phase now. We had a public meeting earlier this month. Where we're going is we're anticipating right-of-way acquisition in 2020, 2021, and construction starting in 2022, lasting for about 2 to 3 years. It's a $200 million project. It will change operations on Tropicana as well as along Dean Martin and underneath the freeway. So we're looking forward to delivering that project to really help movement through the rest of the I-15 corridor. A quick legislative update. Both of our bills are out and signed. One of them simply clarifies our Transportation Board authority over our operations. The other one, though, changes our retention on contractors, our contractor retention to 2.5%. Worked closely with the contracting community on that for their support and are excited to be rolling that out. It helps with our bigger projects. It also helps them with our smaller projects and with their subcontractors as well. We have 2 amendments that we're working on, and they seem to be moving forward with the base bills, one of which will add our freeway service patrol vehicles to the move over law. The base bill is adding tow trucks, and we're going to add the freeway service patrol vehicles as well. So again, protecting those people who are out helping clear our roads, making sure that they're safe. And then the other one is a bill regarding oversized vehicles. Our budget closed last week, so that was good. We got what we asked for, and that's even better. And lastly, a bit of congratulations, two versions of congratulations. One on the left, I have Thor Dyson. He has been with us for almost 30 years. He has been down here. He's he's our deputy chief or assistant chief of operations and maintenance. So he's been down here some, but not as much as you see Tracy. He's retiring, and we wish him well as he moves on to the consulting community. And Cole Mortensen, he is our assistant chief of engineering, will be taking over as a deputy director on July 8th. So announcing his promotion.
Will Cole live in the north or the south?
Cole will live in the north.
Okay. Okay.
Tracy lives.
Okay. So just because I talk with all of our board members, we very much appreciate as much as we can having leadership from the north, spending time down here in the south, really understanding things and our infrastructure and how it works.
Definitely appreciate that. And yes, Cole does live in the north, but he does spend a lot of time down here. And you're going to see simply just with me that I'm going to be down here a lot more than probably previous directors have been. People ask me, they're like, well, I actually have a new executive assistant starting. She's like, well, where do you stay when you're down there? I'm like, at my house. So definitely trying to make sure that we have leadership down here as well.
Appreciate that.
Thank you.
Mayor.
Yes, I want to thank you for sending Jeff LaRue down to the city of Henderson. At our last council meeting, he came in and talked about the high occupancy vehicle lanes. And I think it's a good opportunity for NDOT to communicate with all of the cities in the county, to have representatives come down and share when there are big things happening or changes in systems that impact our community, so that our community understands that. So thank you for having him come down, and hopefully we'll do that with more frequency.
Happy to do it whenever we can.
All right, thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the commission. Your next item is your consent agenda, which is made up of items 5 through 40 and may be taken in one motion.
A motion on the floor. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carries.
Item number 41 is to receive an update on the On-Board study, which is your future transit plan initiative, and we have Director Craig Rayborn to introduce this item.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. Again, I'm Craig Rayborn. I'm the Director of the Metropolitan Planning Organization for the RTC. And I'm just going to provide a brief update about On-Board, your future, or your regional mobility plan. So we began On-Board about 2 years ago as an examination of the need and capacity and feasibility for high-capacity transit. These are the components, really, of the On-Board study. The high-capacity transit is essentially what the study started as an examination of that. But as you can also see, community input was really important. And so as we went out and started talking with the community, one of the things that we heard very prominently was that we needed to also look at ways that we can improve our current transit system. So traditional transit and ways to address that are also included in the study. And then we're in a disruptive time with transportation right now, and so it's necessary to address emerging transit and transportation technologies as part of a long-term, forward-looking transportation plan. And so we've done that as well. Now, just to quickly cover where we are with the high-capacity transit component of the project. We started, when we started the project 2 years ago, we went out and asked our elected officials, the board, stakeholders from the community, the staffs of the local public works and planning departments, the general public, where should we consider high-capacity transit? And what we heard back was everywhere. Basically every arterial and major road in the valley was suggested as a potential route for high-capacity transit. And so that left us with this universe of 55 corridors. And it was extensive and it covered everywhere, but 55 corridors was too much. And so we had to develop a fairly rigorous evaluation process to winnow that 55, that set of 55 down to a manageable number that can actually turn into an implementable plan. And so as we've gone through an evaluation process, we've really been sort of assessing all of the potential corridors against this set of 5 goals and objectives. And then within them, each of these goals and objectives has, or each of these goals rather, has a set of objectives and specific evaluation measures as well. And so we've taken this set of 55 corridors and we've examined how well they make, transit more compelling, or how well they make Southern Nevada more competitive. With this process, along with a very, very extensive, at every point in Onboard, we've been doing extensive public outreach and making sure that it's a dialogue and not just the project team kind of working in a room and crunching numbers. And so at every point, like I said, at every point in the process, we've been doing this outreach. We've actually received feedback from as many as 80,000 people. We've had some type of engagement with 80,000 people, and I'll talk a little bit more about that as I get a little farther into the presentation. With that, we narrowed the 55 corridors down at one step to around 40 corridors, then to 28 corridors, then to 22 corridors, and now we're left with this, what we're calling the Future High Capacity Transit Network. It's a set of 19 corridors that covers the valley. You can kind of see the basic alignments, and these are all corridors that score well in at least one of those 5 goal areas that I just showed on the previous slide, and most of them score well in either all of those areas or in 3 to 4 of those areas. And so they're all corridors that will work for high capacity transit. They'll generate sufficient ridership to support high capacity transit, but they'll also accomplish those other types of goals that were defined by the community as important outcomes for a high capacity transit system. So that kind of, going back to this evaluation process, the enhanced in red area there sort of shows where we are right now. We've defined this high capacity corridor, the high capacity corridors, and we are working with the local agencies to further narrow down exactly what modes would go in, what the preferences are. We're working with your public works and planning departments fairly extensively, and in a lot of instances, the project team has met with staff in individual jurisdictions at least twice a week, as we've been really trying to make sure that we have a full and complete understanding for what each jurisdiction wants to see with each of those 19 corridors. We also are talking about what types of local actions, what types of local strategies they can use to help make those corridors more feasible for high capacity transit in the long run. And then we've been working with them to identify early action corridors, places that we can start taking action on as soon as, even while the plan is underway in some instances, but as soon as the plan is done, ways that we can start to generate the implementation of some of the high capacity transit alternatives that are being identified. Another really important piece, like I've been talking about, is this regular and ongoing community dialogue that we've been trying to have. So, as I said, we've had some type of contact with 80,000 people, 80,000 residents of the valley throughout the course of the project. The most recent major effort that we underwent was a survey. I'll present some of those results, but we conducted a survey last fall where we received more than 12,000 usable responses. Many of those also were able to break them out by zip code where people live, so we're actually able to sort of look across the valley, not just have it be a regional picture, but also be able to zoom in a little bit. And with numbers that size, we're actually able to get decent responses from pretty much across the valley. So one of the things that we really tried to do with that survey was reach out to more than just transit users. We really wanted to make sure that we're getting a good cross-section of the region and looking at drivers, transit users, people who primarily walk as their mode of travel. So this is all based on self-reported numbers, but 68% is a fairly significant set. And one thing I'll also note as I start to go into some of the results from this survey that have sort of been guiding the direction of Onboard for the past few months, is that although we have this ability to split out. We have a good cross-section, and we have this ability to split out by how people report their primary travel occurs. What we see mostly is consistency across all of those modes. And so the results that you see here, that the improvements that are the most important to them of well-maintained roads and improved safety and fewer traffic jams and frequent and good bus service, improved walking and bicycling. If I showed you just the results for bicyclists or just the results for transit users, these would be essentially the same. The numbers might change a little bit. I think a couple instances, one may jump above another, but they're clustered so tightly that there really are a set of things, a set of improvements and outcomes that the public has really shown and told us that matter to them. We also asked about transportation investments. And the really interesting thing, I think, from this slide is how it demonstrates that the outcomes of the transportation system matter. So the ability for the investments in transportation to provide more choices, to get people easier access to their housing and their jobs and their medical needs, our need to address emerging technologies, all of these things, they really demonstrate that it's outcomes that are going to matter when it comes to the final recommendations that we'll bring forward and on board. One of the things that we also asked was, what would make people try a new mode of travel in the future? And the strongest response was some form of high-capacity transit. But also other, transit-related improvements, mobility-related improvements like short walks to bus was an important factor as well. Faster, frequent bus service, ability to use Uber and Lyft, and making sure that we're addressing new technologies and that the system includes new technologies. It's another way to increase confidence and get people to try different and new modes. So we have used that input to sort of reshape Onboard in the past few months. The real core element of Onboard now is what you see in the bottom middle piece, which is this developing mobility options and local implementation strategies. So what we're doing is we're looking at a broad set of strategies, and I'll kind of talk a little bit more about that in a sec. But to put that into context, enhancements to traditional transit that we've already talked about, the need to cover, that's among the sets of strategies that go into that. And then all the work that we've been doing on high-capacity transit is essentially a strategy. And admittedly, it's probably the most prominent of the strategies that we've been looking at so far with Onboard. But it is one of those strategies. And we continue to refine the way that we're looking at emerging technologies. So we're not just identifying potential new technologies that could affect and influence and improve our transit system, but we're looking at the ways in which emerging technologies across the transportation sector might impact the strategies that we're going to look at. Because some of these technologies could enhance the strategy and make it work better in the future. Some of them could render one of these strategies or some of these strategies obsolete, in which case we wouldn't want to bring them forward as something for long-term consideration. Another new element for the Onboard plan is looking at the economic impacts of transit and mobility. So we really want to have a good understanding of the true benefits and the true costs of transit and mobility. So we're looking at the impacts of congestion and how transit and alternative modes of travel can influence that. We're looking at the ways in which transit can improve access for workers to their jobs, for employers to workers. Those things are really important factors. And so we're adding that to Onboard as well. So to quickly go through the strategy section, and I had tried to time this so that the list of strategies flowing through that funnel, my presentation would take exactly that long and then it would be done, but no, we couldn't get the timing to work quite right. But so what we've done is actually very similar to the way that we approach the high-capacity transit strategies. We've identified, working with the stakeholders, looking at best practices across the US and even across the world, we've identified a pretty large set of potential things that the transit system could do in Southern Nevada, that we as the RTC could do to improve mobility or access to transit. And we're applying a set of objectives and goals to sort of narrow that down. So what we're going to do is like I said, we have around 60 or so right now. That list varies a little bit. Some of them are really similar but slightly different, and so, but about 60 or so. We're going to narrow that down over the next month, month and a half, to about 15 to 20 strategies. And for each one of those strategies, we'll then develop a detailed explanation of the strategy and what it can accomplish, what we think it would be able to do, as well as the implementation for how that would work here. And our goal is to really identify the small set of long-term things that we can do as an agency to provide the best bang for the buck for Southern Nevada and trying to improve our transit system and trying to improve our overall regional mobility. So we're on a fairly aggressive timeline for this project. You can see where we are right now. We have 6 elements of this project that are underway at this moment. So we're working on new goals and objectives. They're actually quite similar to the 5 that I showed earlier. We're in the strategy phase. We're starting to discuss how we would approach developing implementation tactics for each one of those strategies. We're finishing up the high-capacity transit recommendations. We're starting on technology assessment and moving that piece along as well. And then we're looking at other regions and the transit and mobility economic benefits that other regions have identified, as well as getting ready to conduct a set of interviews with local leaders to make sure that we're capturing the local perspective on that too. We will have this project done in early 2020. And so it's an aggressive project, but it's moving along quite well. Over the next 90 days, we will have 3 more meetings of what we call the Technical Advisory Group. That is the planning and public works staffs from the Valley's jurisdictions. We'll have, in addition to this briefing, obviously, we'll have presentations and briefings to local agencies, local governing bodies. We'll have a community stakeholder meeting, and we'll initiate another fairly extensive community dialogue to try to get impact or input about the strategies as we've narrowed those down and try to get some ideas from people about their preferences and their responses to those strategies. And that concludes my update, and I'm happy to answer any questions that you may have.
Thank you. Mayor.
Thank you. Great presentation. A couple of questions for you. When you come forward with the recommended plan, will you have recommendations on the modes, say, highest, or no? Will it not include mode? That'd be something that we'd have to take out to a vote of the people, or?
Well, the plan is likely to identify the highest capacity mode that a lot of these routes would be able to support, but we're unlikely to specify a particular mode for each corridor. The reason for that isn't because we don't know or we can't identify what that might be. It's because technology is changing so rapidly now that if we were to identify one technology and we know that a particular route may not actually be able to develop for 10 or 15 years, by the time it's able to develop, the technology that we've identified now may not work. Mm-hmm. And so really what we're trying to do is we're approaching it as sort of highest capacity, medium capacity, and then basic high capacity transit, or something like that, so that we're really identifying so that we'll be able to assert that at the time that a route gets implemented, the highest and most appropriate mode would be the mode that we would work to develop.
Would be recommended. And I appreciate that you've been able to identify the 19 corridors, and just so that you understand the growth that's occurring, and I know you do, that's right. Occurring in Henderson. Our population now is 314,000. Just 2 years ago, it was 277,000. So there's some pretty rapid growth, but that growth isn't just around residential growth, but we're looking at how we create employment centers, whether it's Haas Automation or Google or some of the centers that we're creating in our community, that there will at some point in the future be a demand, I think, for an east to west in Henderson. I see where most of the routes that come into Henderson are north coming south, right. But there really isn't an east to west. So I'm sure that this is a growing, evolving document, that we will accept a plan, but it will also be evolving for the future as the needs change and perhaps greater needs are identified in different parts of the valley.
We will absolutely be doing that. The onboard plan will essentially become part of the overall document that we adopted a couple years ago called Access 2040, the Regional Transportation Plan. So Onboard will become the transit element of that plan, much like all of your communities have your comp plan, your master plan, and then the different elements to that. So Onboard is the transit element for that. So every 4 years, we have to revise the Regional Transportation Plan. So we'll be going on to a cycle where the recommendations that we've made in this version of Onboard will be assessed approximately every 4 years or so. We won't go through an entire new planning process, but we'll be reassessing and trying to make sure that we're identifying new opportunities and new needs as they're developing. So it'll be updated on a fairly frequent basis.
Thank you, and I promise you that our team's going to keep you informed as things.
They
go.
have so far, and I expect them to continue. Yes.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman?
Mayor.
Thank you. Thank you, Craig. Being very practical, are you going to be putting numbers to the options as we go forward, knowing our legislature only meets every other year? It's quite a challenge to try to get anything into budget and be successful rather than just dreams and aspirations that this may happen. And so when do you think in the process of Onboard you'll be able to put guesstimates? I know everything fluctuates all the time.
Right.
But the big concern is we're not up to date with meeting at the legislature annually, as other states do, which really puts a challenge to the RTC and everything that all of us are involved with.
Right. So the final set of recommendations for Onboard will have a planning level estimate that's based, and there'll be all sorts of caveats to that, but a planning level estimate that's based on what the technologies are that we know right now. And so we'll have that ballpark number, and that's essentially what it would be.
If I could add to that, and through you, Mr. Chairman, the prioritization, because I know with NDOT, as we've been talking about, you know, the access to the new stadium and no parking, and knowing our new head, and congratulations, that we really can see some prioritization, especially listening to just what Mayor March has just requested.
Mm-hmm.
So as we go to penciling in funds, estimates, that how you see at that particular time, the priorities.
Yes, absolutely. Part of what we're doing right now is we're having the conversations with your staff and with the staff from the other Valley jurisdictions, is we're identifying, in addition to what long-term preferences they may have for a particular corridor, what modal preference they may have, we're also identifying basically what they think the short-term implementation should look like too. And so the plan, we expect to actually sort of have two elements to it. One would be sort of what we're thinking will probably be about a 10-year vision for what the system could or should look like in about 10 years. And then one would be the long-term final build-out, which could be 20, 30, 40 years into the future. And all of that, of course, will be revised over time. But yeah, that way we will have some prioritization within those. And then as new developments happen, I mean, 4 years ago, there may have been people that were anticipating a stadium. But as new developments happen, that's why we'll be revising the plan on a fairly regular basis.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much.
Members of the commission, next is item number 42, which is to receive an update on the Boulder Highway Multimodal Corridor Study. And we have Director Craig Rayborn with us to give us an update.
And once again, I apologize. Craig Rayborn, it's the Craig Rayborn Show today. I'll just briefly introduce this item, and then I'll turn it over to the consultant team. But we started the Boulder Highway Multimodal Transportation Investment Study about 2 years ago as well, with funding support from Nevada Department of Transportation, and then support and participation from all the 3 local jurisdictions that have contact with Boulder Highway, so City of Las Vegas, Clark County, and the City of Henderson. We last gave an update to you in September. We're getting near completion of the project now, and so we think it's time to provide another update of the progress we've been making and where we are right now. Today, joining me, I have Harshal Desai from Atkins and Jacob Snow from J.A. Barrett. And I think we start with Harshal, right? Yeah. Yeah. Thank you. And he'll give you a quick update on progress with the project.
Thank you, Greg, and good morning, Mr. Chair and members of the board. Hi, Christina. So today I'm here. I'm Harshal Desai with Atkins, and Atkins was tasked to study this 15-mile corridor, and with the purpose of reimagining this corridor as a hybrid urban corridor. As you all know, this corridor was constructed back in 1930s, and at that time, the functionality of this highway was high speed and long distance, whereas as you see today, that functionality has changed completely, especially after the construction of US 95 and how this has changed. And what we see today is most of the trips on this, or the function of this highway is for the first mile, last mile travel with average trip size about 2 miles, less than 2 miles. So, and in addition to that, there is also, this is also a house to, this houses the Border Highway Expressway, and this BRT generates a lot of pedestrian traffic. There's 10,000 daily trips, 11 route crossings, so there's a lot of pedestrian activity on this. When you couple these pedestrian activities with the wide right-of-way, high speeds, lack of lighting on the particular corridor, what we see is it's unsafe for pedestrian. As a matter of fact, 10% of all the fatalities in Nevada has occurred on this particular corridor. So with that in mind, the top goal for this particular corridor was to provide a safe and reliable mode of transportation for all modes of transportation, whether it's vehicle, whether it's pedestrian, whether it's bike. And like I think it was Rob Miller in one of the presentations earlier on the Infrastructure Week, by the way, that was a great video. He said that transportation is not the end, but means to an end. The end, of course, here is also to support the economic redevelopment of that corridor, promote the quality of life along that corridor. And again, we also want to maintain that transit culture that already exists on that corridor. So these are some of the goals. One of the things that we did in the beginning, because it's a 15-mile corridor, we divided this corridor into 6 different segments. And again, the segments were based on the type of stakeholders, different entities that are along this corridor. And we did an extensive stakeholder and public outreach and community outreach, and Jacob Snow here will be talking about that soon. But gathering that input from everyone, we came up with this proposed concept that can be...
If I could, Mr. Chairman, on that slide, could I just ask the question, please? I didn't mean to interrupt, but that slide just brought it to my mind. Did you, in fact, diagram where the predominance of accidents on that corridor take place?
Yeah, we did. We looked into that, and then based on that, we also we came up with like, okay, where the accidents are happening and what the reasons are behind some of those fatalities and accidents.
And will you be sharing those today or later or at some other point, or is the information available online?
I mean, I think the information will be part of the report, if I'm not mistaken. So yes, we'll be sharing.
To me, that line, for those of us, regardless of where your interests are privately or publicly, that to me is very critical as you move forward with how this is going to be addressed. So thank you. I'm sorry, Mr. Chairman.
No, thank you for that question. So, but keeping all that in mind and gathering all the input, we came up with this cross-section that can be applied to this entire corridor. The way we developed this cross-section, or what you see, this proposed concept, was to keep in mind like how it can be flexible enough that it can be revised and configured to address all the stakeholders along that particular corridor. And all the different characteristics that we see along that corridor. So what you see here is a through realm, and that realm is essentially in the center, which is for the high-speed vehicles. That's a 96-foot lane or the corridor in between. And like I said, that's for the high-speed vehicles and the center running transit. And on the sides, what you see, the pedestrian realm, which is mostly for pedestrians, bike lanes. And that particular realm on both sides, which are about 41 feet, can be sort of modified So if you see the next slide, on the next slide, you will see that, hey, we are adding additional lane there. Some of the input that we got from the stakeholders, they wanted to maintain the current lane configuration, the number of lanes through that corridor. So we kind of revised it so that, hey, based on the entity and the particular area and the land use in that area, we can be flexible enough in that pedestrian realm. The next slide here shows the overall 3D rendering of this. A couple of things that I would like to point out. As you can see, that overall character of this Boulder Highway has changed, and you can see that. If you notice, we are also proposing mid-block crossings. These mid-block crossings will be at least at every quarter mile, and that would also reduce the speed and again further improve the pedestrian safety along this corridor. We are also proposing additional lighting along this entire corridor, and I think one of the stakeholder input that we got over and over again from the community and from the stakeholders is a lack of lighting along this corridor. Again, like I said, this was not developed in a vacuum. We went through extensive stakeholder outreach and community outreach, and Mr. Jacob Snow here is going to talk about our outreach efforts.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the Commission. For the record, my name is Jacob Snow with the J. Barrett Company. It's a pleasure to be with you today to talk about the Boulder Highway project in this study. If you look at the post-it notes on the bottom of the screen, there were a number of themes that came through loud and clear from the beginning of the study, through the middle of the study, to the end of the study, which we're approaching now. They were very, very consistent. There was a preference for center running transit, as you've seen in the pictures that Harshal just showed you, and he mentioned the need to install lighting up and down throughout the corridor and to increase the number of pedestrian crossings. And there were stakeholders that we met with, and most of the stakeholders we met with were major property owners, major employers, business organizations, hotel casinos, community groups, public safety groups, and the entities themselves, as well as the major utility companies. And they essentially told us we need to focus on pedestrian safety primarily throughout this corridor, and that needs to be a part of every element that you undertake. Understanding that there's a lot of people that move north and south as well as east and west in this corridor, but everyone that's taking transit, that gets on a bus, gets off a bus, they are a pedestrian. And we need to focus on pedestrian safety throughout this corridor. And that's reflected in the design that you've seen with the increased pedestrian crossings and the lighting. In fact, some of the stakeholders noticed that NDOT was taking a leadership role in this capacity and adding 8 additional crossings, and they did recognize your leadership in that regard and appreciation for that effort. One thing we did hear from every single private sector stakeholder was they wanted us not to take away or decrease their vehicular access to their property. And when they saw the flexibility of the approach that Atkins had come up with, including adding the additional physically separated access lane to facilitate automobile access into and out of the properties, where the average annual daily traffic along portions of Boulder Highway indicates that there still will be a need now and into the future for 3 lanes of automobile travel, they expressed their great appreciation for us listening to them. They thought that that was a great way to combine an improvement in pedestrian safety as well as still as maintaining it in their minds, improving vehicular access to their properties. And so what we experienced from these major stakeholders was universal support for this general concept. We're very gratified to see that that was the case. Now, if I could shift your attention to the top 4 post-it notes on that slide. These other themes came through when we had the final concept that we've shown to you today. They said, this really looks wonderful. We really appreciate what you've done. This really looks great. And they said, we don't receive a lot of attention, and there hasn't been a lot of physical infrastructure improvement in this corridor in quite some time. And they're very appreciative of your time and attention to what they feel is very critical to not just their livelihood, but their way of life for those who live and work in this corridor as well. And they said that anything that you do in this conceptual plan would be of great assistance and would be very much appreciated. And then the question started to turn to, well, when is this going to happen? When can you get this done? And obviously there was, in their minds, an emphasis on getting it done sooner rather than later. And then there was a healthy skepticism, as I mentioned the last time that we reported to this board, that they thought, this is too nice for government to do something like this. We actually don't think you can do this. And I said, you better be careful if you throw down the gauntlet to these people, because they will deliver for you. And I'm pleased to hear that I have noted that there are some jurisdictions that are now actively moving forward with the design for this concept. So we're very excited that this is not going to be a study that's just going to sit on a shelf, but this is going to be happening, hopefully sooner rather than later. And that was the majority of the stakeholder feedback that we received. Now, subsequent to our last stakeholder interviews, the staff of the RTC worked on some major research and identified, we've been working with a very large group of people in our database who live and work in this corridor, and they surveyed these people, and they had more than 1,800 surveys come back. And for the people that live and work in this corridor, they liked the concept as well. Nearly 80% approval of the concept, and you can see that there was a real strong appreciation for the additional street lighting, the wider sidewalks in a more physically separated pedestrian realm from the faster moving cars. People thought they could move more safely and comfortably in this corridor in the wider sidewalks. The center running transit was very popular, the additional mid-block crossings, and the additional access lane separated from the traffic that would be slower moving but yet improve the access to the businesses and the dual cycle tracks. So these concepts proved to be very popular with the people that live and work in this corridor. Now we're going to move to how much this is going to cost, and I don't think it's appropriate for a consultant to spend other people's money. So I'm going to...
Excuse me just for a sec, Commissioner.
A question, Mr. Snow. So as you worked up the details, do you have pedestrian counts and know where the counts are higher? Do you have a sense of why they're crossing the highway? Are they crossing the highway to get to school? Is it all about just getting to and from a job? Is it about commerce? Do you have a sense of any of that?
We do. And in regard to your question and to the mayor from the city of Las Vegas's question, I want to call you Mayor Gibson. I apologize for that, Commissioner. And Mayor Goodman, I'm a little bit too old maybe for my good sometimes. But we noted where all of the pedestrian incidents have been, not just fatalities, but all the incidents have been up and down this corridor, and they are distributed throughout the corridor. There are some places that have a higher concentration than others, and that has dovetailed well into our study of the pedestrian activity in this corridor. And Commissioner, it's all of the above. People are using Boulder Highway now more for utility transportation, to get their daily needs, to go to work, to take transit, to get on and off the bus, to go to the store, to go to school. There are a lot of children that are walking to and from school that go near or cross this corridor. There are multiple pedestrian uses, but much of the way Boulder Highway has evolved now is people are using it as utility transportation. And one of their primary modes of transportation, if you spend any time on Boulder Highway, you will see people riding a bike. And it's not people in their spandex on their racing bikes. These are basic utilitarian bicycles, and it is a primary mode of transportation. There are many families that don't have an automobile that live in this corridor, and they rely on biking to get to and walking for their primary modes of transportation, to go to school, to go to work, to get groceries or supplies, or to just visit their neighbors or to go to a recreation center.
So you have the detail. The reason I ask that is I've driven Boulder Highway my whole life, and I still drive it. And there are parts of the highway where it's obvious there's a lot of pedestrian traffic. We have the need for a new school, and one of the considerations, at least on the county side, I'm sure at the district side, is how do we zone those schools so that we avoid the need to go across Boulder Highway. But the reason I ask the question is that there are areas where there's a lot of pedestrian traffic. There are areas where there is none. And I'm just wondering, so is the notion here that one size fits all, that we design and we develop whatever the infrastructure is there to meet the highest demand, or to detail meet the needs of the pedestrians in the areas where there is a whole lot of pedestrian traffic. And we designed the whole corridor in that way. Is that what we're doing? Have we taken into account the differences in the neighborhoods along the way?
We have taken into account the differences and the need for flexibility. We might have a universal concept that has some particularly common themes, such as at least 2 lanes of through traffic, and you can see it on the screen in front of you. 2 lanes of through traffic in the through realm, higher speed, as well as center running transit. That's something that you'd see throughout the corridor, and taking a look at the vehicular traffic and the transit traffic that is throughout that corridor, those 2 characteristics are something that we can apply as a universal theme throughout the corridor. But if you look at the pedestrian realm here, on either side, I mean, if you count the number of lanes, there's only 4 lanes of automobile traffic there. And through some of the lower traffic portions, particularly in the city of Henderson, where there isn't the higher annual average daily traffic, that pedestrian realm can be configured in a number of different ways. And you see just one of the ways it could be configured here. We came up with numerous options for how that pedestrian realm could be configured depending upon the location along Boulder Highway, depending upon the preferences of the businesses and the entity and the jurisdiction within which it resides. And you can see there that in this fairly wide pedestrian realm of 41 feet on both sides, they have taken that and turned it into a linear park. And there's also a dual cycle track and a much wider sidewalk. And so it can be configured in a number of different ways. Here's just one different way with which that pedestrian realm could be configured. And that would be where if an entity were to work with the businesses that needed it and wanted it, you could take that 41 feet and add an access road, a 1-lane, one-way access road to facilitate the movement of vehicles into and out of those businesses. You still have the wide sidewalk, and you can see the dual cycle track there as well. And that can be configured a number of ways. There are a lot of options that we have retained for the entities, for NDOT, who owns the right-of-way, and for the businesses so that they can configure this according to their needs and also be flexible for how we could deal with this as we advance in the future. I will point out that 1-lane, one-way access road, when you talk about a future with autonomous and connected vehicles, curb space and curbside pickup and drop-off become premium in your good planning for the future, especially as we talk about transitioning from everyone owning and operating their own car to possibly going through some sort of a mobility as service and doing a short-term rental for every trip we take. That curbside flexibility and adding curbside space like that could prove to be very, very valuable for the future as we go forward. So there is flexibility, especially on the pedestrian realm, for how this can be configured depending on the neighborhood, depending on the desires of the business community, and depending on the desires of the jurisdiction. With that, I'm going to...
Jake, I'm sorry, Councilman?
Yes, thank you. I was looking around for it. Thank you, Mr. Snow. It's good to see you again. I didn't see it, but maybe I missed it. Will there be a projected any projections as to future potential impact to the area? I mean, that's a side of town. I'm like the commissioner. I recall the not so good old days, having to drive and being stuck in traffic all up and down when I had to go to Henderson and to visit my grandpa. But of course, since the 95 was built, there's no other way to say it. It's been a great economic downturn for the entire corridor. Are there any projected studies of potential impact, positive impact, besides the construction? I'm talking to revival of these small businesses, other services that are provided along the corridor. I'd like to know because I see a great potential with this. I'm actually very excited for that entire area.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, through you to Councilman Barone. As part of our study, we didn't do any economic impact studies that would be directly related to this concept that we've been sharing with you. However, we're about to share with you what we think some of the investment costs will be. And as you looked at that concept, and as we showed it to the businesses that are stakeholders along Boulder Highway, there was tremendous optimism from them that this is going to certainly do a lot to help them in their ability to make this a more attractive place and increase and improve access to their property. And usually when you combine those types of investments that improve access, you do see an improvement in economic activity, but I can't give you any specifics.
Thank you. And the reason why I bring it up is because people like to see numbers. People like to see numbers. We can, and especially if, like, later on, if you're held to the numbers and turns out you were right, then you look like geniuses. So, if there could be, I don't know, I don't know if there's any money to study it, but if there could, I would be very happy to see that. And it'd be good to see that the corridor really come up again.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, through you, Craig Rayborn, MPO Director. Councilman, that is actually one of the considerations that we think the local agencies, as the plan is advancing, will be taken into consideration. So this plan is significant enough that it's actually triggering re-examination of some of the current land use plans that are along the corridor right now. And so we think that it's sort of developing a synergy between the transportation improvements and the types of land use improvements that can trigger some other types of economic benefits too. So yeah, I think as those land use plans change, then that will start to provide a much better bit of insight into what the economic impacts might be. Oh, and Jacob was about to turn it over to me anyway, so we don't know what the number's going to be. Sorry. No, sorry. It's been up while we've been talking for like the last 10 minutes. But yeah, the planning level cost estimate for these improvements that you see that you've seen right now is about $145 million for the 15 miles along the corridor. So it's a little bit less than $10 million per mile. That does not include some of the specific transit improvements that might happen with the center running transit system. So some things like the actual stations and those types of things. But that's kind of also being addressed through onboard. And so we're working, and these are somewhat interrelated. We also do think that as we continue to move forward in working out the implementation with the local agencies, that through a combination of local, state, and if necessary, federal funds, that these costs can be met to make these improvements happen. So then the steps to completion. Like I said at the start of this, we're almost done. We're doing this presentation over the next month. We'll be doing, or I think actually we'll go into July for some of these because of changeovers on some of the governing bodies. But we'll be doing presentations to the local governing bodies as well. Very similar presentation, but maybe specific to their jurisdictions. We're going to have a series of 3 final public meetings along the corridor. It's much how we've structured public meetings in the earlier stages of the process too. And then we'll have the plan ready for the final report and adoption. And then one thing, just mentioning, getting back to the comments about when will this happen and can we actually do it, we would want to draw attention. The City of Henderson is already moving forward on preliminary design and engineering. So as soon as the plan is done, they'll be ready to start on the engineering and design. And so there will be progress on this plan as once it's done, we do think it's going to start moving into implementation very quickly. So that concludes this report, and we're happy to answer any questions that the board may have.
I just have to comment that, yeah, I am so excited. A lot of times we do these studies and we see these renderings and then they look utopian and then they sit, or we decide we don't have the funding for it. We're so lucky on a couple fronts. One, that City of Henderson is actively recognizes the safety issues associated with Boulder Highway and wants to get their portion under construction right away. And again, we have the FRI money available and sitting and waiting to be spent. So I'm very excited that this utopian plan that we have seen is something that's actually going to be constructed, and we won't have to put it on a shelf. So very proud of City Henderson team.
Thank you, Tina and Craig and Jacob and Harshal, and I appreciate the comments that you've shared, and this project is very important to Henderson. As you said, 10% of the pedestrian deaths in the state of Nevada have occurred along the Boulder Highway. That's unconscionable. And this conversation came up a number of years ago when actually Governor Sandoval was governor, and there was a stretch of road in Reno that he expedited the improvements to that roadway because that was the #1 roadway for vehicle deaths. And so it's important for us that NDOT prioritize this, that you recognize that our citizens, we value their lives and we value the quality of community. We value what the investment that will occur in this roadway will do for the communities of Las Vegas, Clark County, and the city of Henderson, and that this is a very important priority for us. And we'd like to ask that NDOT look at the right-of-way and how we can look to move that right-of-way to the cities and the counties. And then maybe, I know in the case of Henderson, we would even like to consider an O&M agreement where we could begin to manage some of those roadways even before that right-of-way is completed. But I think it's very important for our communities that we ensure the safety of all of our residents. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman,
Councilwoman.
if I might ask a question. We earlier were given the map of what would be the high transit roads. Are you foreseeing in the future that some of those might have similar sidewalk and pedestrian area, things like that?
Yeah, Mr. Chair, through you, absolutely, we do envision that. And in fact, I should mention that because the city of Henderson is moving forward on some of their improvements, and you can if we had a way to pull that slide back up, and you could see that Boulder Highway is one of those future high capacity corridors. That will, and I had mentioned that we're looking at early action corridors too. So Boulder Highway, at least that portion in Henderson, kind of falls into that category. They're already doing a lot of the design work and planning the implementation, a lot of the infrastructure that would support the types of high-capacity transit that we're talking about in the future. Oh, and the pieces of that make high-capacity transit work that we're also identifying through onboard are very synergistic. Appears to be my word of the day. Are very synergistic to a study like what we've been doing along Boulder Highway. And so as other corridors get identified and start to move into more advanced planning, it's quite likely that we'll do similar studies for them and try to bring them up to a standard where the built environment really supports the use of the corridor as a high capacity corridor.
On the map, I noticed that Charleston was one of those high transit routes.
It is.
And right now, the city is building along in front of the medical district something similar to what you showed. And I always wondered what's going to happen after you get past the medical district, because you still have that heavy movement of cars on Charleston. So I'm assuming that everybody's working together so that whatever we're doing by the city is going to match with whatever's going to be done later on.
Right. We are working very closely as we're moving onboard forward and to completion for the high capacity transit piece of that. We're working very closely with the Public Works and Planning staffs of the City of Las Vegas for what to do along Charleston as it advances farther to the west.
Well, with the project information that I've seen is similar to what you have here at Charleston. So if it goes back, I'm waiting for just one of those bus benches too, but we just want to show everything off. But in any case, that's the only concern I had, that we do in Charleston in our medical district, we'll be able to eventually blend with what you're doing without big changes having to be made.
Yes.
Thank you.
No, I just have to comment that the City of Las Vegas has a stellar planning team that we work with that cares very much and is passionate about Charleston.
That's right. We have a very passionate, competent, stellar team on that.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, if I may.
Mayor Goodman.
Also, just as by way of reminder, you know, we have a census count coming up next year. And knowing while the growth is explosive everywhere, certainly in the Southwest where there really is nothing being done of a major beyond the 215, and then of course at the city of Las Vegas up in the Northwest. These are communities that are seeing explosive growth, and I know that has to figure into a futuristic look of additional traffic off the 215, mostly in the Southwest, where Susan Breger was the former commissioner and traveling to all those bus stop openings. And then too, for us up in the Northwest, it's just really explosive throughout town and the greater unincorporated Clark County. But those are pocket areas, and I think the census count's going to have great bearing on how you proceed, and I'm sure I'm lecturing to the choir, so forget it.
Mr. Chair, through you, absolutely, that is a consideration that we're looking at. You know, the analysis that we're doing so far has been based on the data, the numbers, and the projections that we have right now. But we do think that with the next census and with some additional travel survey work that we'll be doing as the MPO over the next couple of years, that we'll have a better picture as we move into the revision of onboard that I mentioned that would happen in about 4 years. And I will frankly say that there are some pretty strong indications that a solid north-south route along the western edge of the valley would probably perform quite well in the future, given some of the trends. Although we can't yet analyze it, we think that the trends kind of move that direction.
Very good. Well, it's a great segue. Mark, how are we going to pay for all this? Let's talk about
We
the
need
budget.
to accept that report?
Members of the, oh, go ahead.
Do we need to motion to accept that report or no? Oh, that's not an action, okay.
Well, yes, I'm sorry.
Motion to accept the report.
And I'm not sure, did we do anything on 41? So could we make a motion to accept both? Sure. Mayor?
That'll be my motion.
Motion on the floor to
Okay.
accept both reports. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the commission. Next on your agenda, you'll hear from your finance team, and items number 43 through 45 will be introduced by Deputy CEO MJ Maynard.
Thanks, Tina. Chairman Brown and members of the commission, agenda item 43 is to receive a Good now? Okay, we're good. All right, so agenda item 43 is to receive a presentation on the tentative budget for fiscal year 2020. The budget has been on record at the RTC and the Clark County Clerk's Office for review by the public since April 11th, 2019. This presentation will be followed by agenda item 44, which is to conduct a public hearing on the tentative budget. At the conclusion of the public comment period, agenda item 45 is to adopt the final budget for fiscal year 2020 and direct the Department of Finance to transmit the final budget as adopted to the Nevada Department of Taxation. And RTC's Chief Financial Officer, Mark Trosta, will now present the budget.
Thank you, MJ. We will start out this budget presentation with looking at how much we're budgeted to spend in fiscal 2020. We're asking for approval to spend $679 million. You can see on this slide that capital outlay is the largest portion of that spend at $276 million, followed by contracted services, mostly for transit, at $238 million. This is an 11% decrease from fiscal 19's ask in the budget then. We last year asked for $765 million. Looking at capital outlay, you can see here that FRI2 is the biggest expenditure there of $105 million that we're budgeting, and then transit at $76 million. Total roadway work is budgeted at $197 million. And then looking at the transit capital budget, we're budgeting $76.4 million, and of that, $58.3 million will be paid for with grants. And looking at the transit operating expenditures, we're budgeting $247.8 million, and the majority of that being contracted services at $214 million. And you can see the percentages around that. The majority there, 86.6%, is contracted services. Looking at our bonds, we have outstanding $749 million, and our annual debt service next year is budgeted at $87.5 million. And then looking at how we're going to pay for that, our revenue or funding sources, we're budgeting a total of $593 million there. You can see that sales tax at 38% is the largest portion of that. We're actually budgeting almost $225 million in sales tax revenue for next year. And looking at the next chart here, you can see that sales tax at 66.2% of the transit operating revenue, or that $168 million. That represents 3/8% of sales tax. And then looking at the other 1/8% of sales tax, we're budgeting $56.9 million there, and we show how that is spent on that pie chart. Sales tax has been very robust over the last 10 years, and we expect that to continue into fiscal 20. We are just budgeting a 3.5% increase in sales tax for 2020. In 19, we're estimating that'll come in at 5% or better. We're currently at 7.5% increase in 19 over 18. And motor vehicle fuel tax, we're budgeting almost $75 million for 2020, and about the same amount we're projecting for 19. And then FRI1, we're budgeting almost $91 million in 2020, and we're looking at that kind of flat. The fuel tax has kind of slowed down here at the end of the year, so we're looking at that flattening out a little bit. FRI2, that goes up due to a rate increase that will be effective July 1. So we're budgeting $17.6 million in FRI2 revenue. And then fare revenue for transit, we're budgeting a slight decline in that still. We're looking at a 1% decline in fiscal 19 and 20 in fare revenue. That concludes my prepared remarks. I'd be glad to answer any questions.
Comments or questions for Mark? Okay. Item 44 is to conduct a public hearing on the tenant.
No, so you'll do the public comment first, and then close it, and then approve the budget. Oh, 41, actually, I'm not sure.
Sure, we can entertain a motion to receive the presentation. Motion on the floor. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. And now we'll open up the public hearing on the tentative budget. Anyone here wishing to speak, please step forward, state your name for the record.
Chair Brown, members, Alita Dupree for the record. I'm going to talk to you specifically about the budget today. It was a very brief presentation, So I'm going to kind of dig down into things that I would like to see in this budget. Certainly, from the committee meeting I've been to, it is important that we continue the purchase of the new buses, especially the 60-footers, and bring those into the Southern Territory. For I am experiencing the benefits of the long buses in the Northern Territory, riding on the 113 to the Sawyer Building and then on to Nellis Air Force Base in the Northeast Kingdom. So now we need to bring this to the South and to the Strip. So this is something that should be in our capital expense, as well as to further develop upon the capital that we have in the vehicles with the bus validators that are placed at the front doors of these buses and also on all 3 doors of the Strip Express, that we can move away from tapping a chip card for reduced fare and swiping a paper ticket to more of the use of the app and to convert the chip card into something that fare value can be loaded on, which is very common in other agencies. I have for you one such card, a tap card that we can use. So I think we're just about there. And hopefully soon we will test the electric bus this summer and put that into our capital budget. California has a mandate, so it's coming soon. And we have to be mindful of sales tax, more efficient vehicles, and people like myself that don't have cars. We're not going to be spending as much money on fuel. So Chicago, I believe if you spend money in the city of Chicago, 1% of that goes to the Chicago Transit Authority. 1%. And we're dealing with 3/8. So we have to make the steps and have the strong stomach and will to raise money for this most important system so we can keep it going into the future and buy some more of those nice long buses. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. Anyone else wishing to speak to the board on the budget? Seeing and hearing no one, will close the public hearing and move on to 45. And we'll entertain a motion. There are no comments or questions.
To adopt the final budget for fiscal year 2020 and direct the Department of Finance to transmit the budget to the Department of Taxation.
Motion on the floor. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Members of the Commission, we can skip item number 46. We do not have a need to meet closed doors. We'll move on to item number 47, which is to conduct your final citizens participation period.
Second time set aside for public comment. Those wishing to speak to the board.
Chair Brown and members, Alita Dupree for the record. Now I'm going to talk to you about some different things. I was fortunate to use this new service, which I had heard about. I don't hear about soft openings much, but I found out about it through the online version of a newspaper called Trip the Strip. And it's my hope that we will advance this service territory to include downtown and this county building, because then I can have the one-seat ride from near where I live to come in part to these meetings, among other things. So to have this microtransit on the Strip is very helpful to me, as it can be a very difficult ride on the Strip. So I get to ride affordably in a 11-passenger van. So I know that during the times on the Strip when things get very crowded, I, especially as a person with disabilities, will be able to have a seat to get me where I need to go, and I am able to go to the same bus stops as the larger buses go to. So I have a sense of consistency. I was very fortunate to experience the personalized service. I used it and I got a very nice text from leadership at Keolis. So this is something that is very much above and beyond what one would normally expect in a transportation service. So that's most of what I'm thinking about today. Again, we have a lot of work to do over the summer that hopefully we will have the procurement for the new long buses so we can have them in the southern territory. So as a person of challenges and disabilities, I can say I am being served. I have been, and I expect that I will be. I do ask in your deliberations that you still reconsider to have us a light rail. I believe that this team that sits before you has the knowledge and the capability and the wherewithal to run a railroad. And I've been on many railroads, and it is time for this community to have one. Challenges are difficult but can be solved. Railroads are built into airports, and they are built on streets, and there were pictures of Boulder Highway with light rail vehicles. So our future needs to have the stability of rail, because Maryland Parkway and Boulder Highway and the Strip are not going anywhere for hundreds of years, I'm sure. They'll be with us always. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else wishing to speak to the board? Seeing and hearing no one, thank you all. This meeting is adjourned.